Today's cool tool is going to help you create a much neater double sewn hem. What I'm talking about here is creating a very neat finish on a shaped hem. This works well for like shirt tail hems or very full skirt hems, lightweight fabrics, and it's been called a lot of different things. I learned about it way back when I first started to sew, and it was called the Calvin Klein hem back in the day because it was popular on Calvin Klein ready-to-wear garments. So what I want to do is show you how I've been sewing it, and then the cool tool I'm going to share with you is wash away thread. This wash away thread allows you to do the first row of stitching to secure the folded edge, and then when you finish the hem, you sew with a color that either coordinates or contrasts your fabric, and then after you wash the garment, this row of stitching is going to disappear. So let's dive into it. Before I show you how to work with it, let's look at the hem of the shirt that I made a few weeks ago, my button-down shirt. I'm not wearing it today. Today I'm wearing the shirt that I shared on FabFit Friday last week, where I rotated my bust dart to the shoulder, and then I hid that shoulder dart in the seam between a front yoke, and the rest of the front bodice. However, I did a review of the fit and style of this, and while I love the fit came out just as I intended. I don't love this bib looking front yoke, so I'm going to be working on changing that into something that's more attractive. It might even be a matter of just making it a deeper V or some sort of different shape for my front neckline. Deepening it will make it even easier for me to pop it over my head. So that's the deal with what I'm wearing. But you've probably seen me in my red linen button-down shirt, and look at this hem. Okay, I'm going to show you the hem from the right side. Okay, so this is how it looks from the right side. Very nice, neat, narrow hem. From the wrong side, what I want you to notice here is you can see 2 rows of stitching, and it's kind of messy looking in my opinion, because the way you create this hem is you fold the hem up so it's about a ½ an inch longer than you want, or 3/8, somewhere in that narrow range. You sew along the fold, you trim the excess away, and then you fold it up again, that final 1/4 or 3/8, and you sew along the folded edge to create this hem. So I did a sample before I started this tutorial to show you how it looks when the thread is removed, and I did it 2 ways. First, I just ran it under tap water for like literally 20 seconds and dried it, and then I soaked the second half in some water for about 10 minutes. So let me show you the difference in the progression of removing this wash away thread. So in this first sample, look at how nice and neat that looks from the right side, and then from the wrong side you can see it looks neat, but you also see the remnants of the wash away thread underneath, the little needle holes and little bits of that thread left. So running it underwater gets rid of most of the thread. But then here's an example of when I soaked it for 10 minutes. I think you can see just soaking it for 10 minutes completely removed that thread. And I think when you compare this sample to this sample, you can see how much neater it looks. The other thing it does for you is, obviously, if you're working with something super lightweight, it removes a little bit of the bulk, because even a line of stitching can add stiffness and a little bit of weight to it. So if you want something that's super light and floaty, getting rid of that second row of thread might be helpful for what you're trying to achieve. So now let me show you how to work with this thread. So I've already threaded it in my machine, and I wound a bobbin, and I wound the bobbin exactly the way I would wind an all-purpose thread. The one thing I want to share with you here is I'm going to put my fabric on top so you can just see. It's a relatively thick thread. It looks like top stitching thread. So I do have a size 16 top stitch needle in there. And then the first thing I did when I went to try to thread it through the eye of the needle is I licked the end of the thread. Now obviously this is wash away thread. Don't do that. It kind of got curled up a little bit. You know what I mean? So you don't want to wet it. But what you can use is Thread Magic to lube it up. And I'm just going to show you again how to use this stuff. You basically put the thread into the Thread Magic, close the lid, and then you just then pull it through like this and it lubes the thread. That doesn't seem to have any ill effect to this wash away thread. So first I tried sort of smoothing it out, cutting it on an angle, and then putting it through the eye of the needle. And with that Thread Magic, I was able to thread the needle, fairly easy with a top stitch needle. Now, if you can't get the thread through the needle alone, you can use a thread cradle. A thread cradle is when you take it's when you take a loop of thread, put the ends through the needle, and then put your thread through the loop and pull it through like that. So if you're having trouble threading it through your needle, you can use the thread cradle technique. However, if you do have Thread Magic and you're using a top stitch needle, it's likely you'll be able to thread it by itself. Let's just sew the first path of this. Let's pretend that this is my hem and I'm folding it up so it's literally, a 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch longer than I want my hem allowance to be. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start stitching. Now for this, I'm making my stitch length a little bit longer than I would normally do, so maybe like 4.5. And I'm just going to start stitching. And as I stitch, I'm going to keep it really close to the folded edge. Now here's the thing, because this thread is going to disappear, I don't have to be super accurate. Okay, so now that I've finished that, let's pull this out and look at it. All right, now I'm going to do a quick trim job. The idea here is just want to trim close to the edge. So I'm trying to just keep my blade of my scissors, or my little snips here, skating along. If you follow along with me, you may have seen the cool tool where I compared curved bladed scissors to straight bladed scissors. The curved scissors work so much better. I think those are packed in my KDK bag and I haven't taken them out yet, so we're just going to use these straight bladed scissors, straight blades. But no, the little scissors with the curve are much easier to work with when you're trying to trim neatly. Alright, so here's how my trimmed hem looks now. Okay, and you can see that row of stitching is really not on the exact fold. And it's a little bit wobbly in places, but again, we don't care because it's going to disappear. All right, now the next step is I need to rethread my machine with the thread I'm going to use to finish the hem with all-purpose thread. This will be really easy to thread because I have that large eye needle in there with a regular thread. I'm not going to switch my needle. Okay. All right, so now let's sew again. So now this time you fold it again, and this time I'm going to try to stay right on the fold because now this matters, this shows, right? So we're going to just stitch right along, and I'm going to reduce my stitch length back down to maybe 3.5 or so. And I'm just going to stitch to the outside of the wash away thread. And actually that wash away thread gives you a really good guide to help, guide your needle to stay put right, so look how nice it looks from the right side. Right? And then let's turn it over. So look how nice and neat that is. And imagine once I wash that thread away, it's going to be perfect. So I'm really thrilled with this Cool Tool. This wash away thread is going to be my go-to every time I do a double sewn narrow hem. All right, another use for this thread is if you're into making jeans and you want to use this wash away thread to sew the back yoke onto the back leg before creating a flat felled seam. So once you finish doing the flat felled seam, the row of stitching you use to attach the yoke to the jeans will disappear and it just looks a little more authentic, like you did it like ready to wear. So that's another thing I'm going to use this thread for. So I'm sure there are other things I'm going to be thinking of going forward, but I really, really love this thread. I put a link to it in the description below, so check that out. If you have any questions or comments, please post those below and I will help you. If you're enjoying my content, consider liking and subscribing to my channel because it helps me grow. I want to thank everybody for taking a minute to watch. Have a wonderful rest of your day.